No issues?
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So yeah, I request Anuj to formally start the session. Anuj is the Secretary of Research Wing of PG Academics and Career Council, Student Gymkhana IIT Kanpur. I request Anuj to carry forward the session.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. I am Anuj, and on behalf of the Academic and Career Council, I would like to welcome you all to today's talk. It is my pleasure to introduce Sally Bhatt. She is currently a PhD scholar at Carnegie Mellon University. Prior to starting her PhD, she was a pre-doctoral researcher at Google Research and research intern at Microsoft Research. She completed her bachelor's at BITS Pilani. Today, she will be sharing her insights on navigating the research landscape. Uh, Sally, I would like to hand over the talk to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anuj, for the introduction. Thank you for inviting me. I am excited to share about my journey. Like I said, at any point, if there are questions, please feel free to the rest of the session can just be like an open question and answer. If you want to ask the questions anonymously, there's a link in the chat where you can like submit a question. I have it sort of open next to me, so I'll keep a tab at it. Okay, so to get started, I think Anuj already introduced this. I was an undergrad at BITS from 2017 to 2021. In my final year, I did my bachelor thesis. So at BITS, we are allowed to do our final year thesis externally. So you can go at a research institution or visit someone in another academic institute and do your thesis there. So I did that at MSR India. And then I spent 2 years at Google in what is known as a pre-doc role. And this is basically like it's a fancy name for a research assistantship, but it's a full-time job doing research basically. And since 2023, I started my PhD here at CMU. I'm currently in my third year. And yeah, I want to start by saying that it takes just one person to sort of take a chance on you. And for me, that was the MSR India internship. And from there, I think things sort of fell into place on its own almost. I think it's usually like that first break is usually what you need, and it only takes one break. So yeah. I want to talk a little bit about what I think I wanted to share across, what I have thought, things that I wish I knew when I started, things that I know now, and I think everyone else should. So the first thing is like basics are really, really important. Coursework is important. I, as a CSR, like I know I have one course which I think is very underrated, and I wish I had taken more advanced versions of it. I wish I had paid more attention to it in undergrad. But what do you think are some underrated courses? Feel free to just unmute and like throw me your guesses, and then I will reveal what's mine.
Discrete mathematics.
Discrete mathematics, that's a good one. What else?
Linear algebra.
Linear algebra, that is a very good one. Yes, that is a close second to my answer. Any other guesses? Okay, so for me it is statistics, and this is partly because I do a lot of evaluation work with machine learning. Obviously, this is I should have started by saying that all of this experience advised is extremely biased by the fact that I work in natural language processing. I work with large language models. And so this is like very machine learning, AI, those kinds of fields. And so obviously all of my experience, my advice is very biased by this. If you are working in different areas, computer science, outside computer science, a lot of this advice might not apply. And I encourage you to sort of talk to people who are working in those fields to get a better sense of what is needed. So anyway, for me, the answer is like advanced statistics. And I see a chat that says Robin Stats, which is, I think, close. I think statistics is one of those courses where like we had like one first year class where they taught basic statistics, and I took one another sort of advanced class, but well, I wasn't very good at it. So I kind of ignored it more than I should have. And then since starting my PhD, I've had to like sit down and read textbooks to do the kind of work that I do, because a lot of evaluation research, especially if you want to do rigorous machine learning, a good grasp on statistics is like, it helps a lot. It helps the rigor of your work. So yeah, pay attention to coursework. And yeah, some fundamental skills, Python programming. I know everyone is like, English is the new programming language and all that. And I don't have thoughts on that debate yet. I am not a Claude Code Power user just yet. But I think knowing programming is important. A familiarity with AI frameworks, so things like PyTorch, Hugging Face, things like this. I think that especially now when it is so easy to use things like Hugging Face and like, train models in just like one line of code, it becomes more important to be familiar with some of these frameworks, because on the day there will come a day when you will have an idea that is not implemented directly in one of these libraries, and you will have to go inside these like big messy code bases and make some changes. So having habit of looking at the code is like really important. I was scared of this for a very long time. I would, if I wanted to do a project, I would like look up GitHub repos that have done similar things and start from them. So I was like genuinely scared of like writing code on my own, or like, diving into these huge messy code bases to figure out what is going on when something is not working. But I think over time I've gotten over that fear, and I think that is a powerful thing to do. And the only way to do it is to do it, I guess. There's no other way. So yeah, don't be afraid of code. And I guess basic machine learning, deep learning, NLP, I think fundamentals are important. I think there is a lot of scope to do good work if your basics are clear. I think this is something that we've all heard our entire lives, while preparing for JEE, while being in engineering, etc. But I'll be the person who stresses it one more time, like basics are important. So yeah, this is just some of my, I think, curriculum of stuff that you kind of need to know for the job that I do. Obviously, the more specific you get into research, there might be other things that are more important for you. And I guess you figure that out as you go. I wanted to point out that there are tons of courses available online. Obviously, like I'm pretty sure IIT Kanpur has a healthy set of like courses covering all of these topics. But if you're looking for more sort of options, or you're looking for something specific that maybe is not offered, this is an example of a website of a class called ANLP, which is A is short for advanced. So this is advanced NLP from my department. And a lot of times with some of these courses that are available online, there are like YouTube lectures, but there are also like the homeworks. The homeworks for ANLP are all public. They're available on GitHub, and they're really nice homeworks. So they're things like they get you to implement the Llama pre-training loop from scratch in a homework. So there'll be like some skeleton code, and like you have to fill in like some parts of it, and the parts of it are related to like the pre-training of the model. So I think that like this course and a bunch of these other sort of fundamental like intro to ML, intro to machine learning, intro to NLP, these courses have like really good homework to familiarize you with like the nuts and bolts of the basics, and I encourage you to sort of look at them, do them if you're following any of these courses. I then want to talk about a little bit of like what stepping stones could be. And I know there were a bunch of questions on the form too around sort of building your profile. And I want to say that I know I said that like the Microsoft research thing was my first break in some sense, and that is very true, but I don't think that you get a first break in the void, right? Like you need to have something on your CV, something in your profile for someone to take a chance on you. No one is going to take a chance on a blank CV. And so these are some of the steps sort of before that break that you can take to sort of like start building that profile. Obviously, I think the farther you go, the expectations, the requirements increase. So like the kind of profile that you need to get a research internship is slightly different from the kind of profile that you need to get like a PhD admission and so on, right? And so these are some of the things that people can do while you are in your undergrad, in your second, third year. Some of these things I did in my late second-ish, third year, as a sort of like pre-processing step in some sense to the research internships. So at the time, I don't know if this exists anymore, but at the time, Coursera had what was called project-based courses, which was really nice. And so there would be these courses where there would be like some sort of like problem, like, I don't know, build a classifier for sentiment analysis. I know that sounds like a very maybe simple thing to do in this day and age, but like back in 2019, when we did not have ChatGPT, this was the kind of projects that I was doing. I think it is similar to the homeworks that I spoke about before, where like there is a problem statement, like there are milestones, you have like some skeleton code, you have to like fill in the rest. So it just like familiarizes you with like the nuts and bolts of using machine learning, using these systems. I think Kaggle competitions are really good. I forgot to actually put it here, but another great thing is like hackathons. So a lot of like tech fests tend to have hackathons. That was a tech fest at IIT BHU where there was a hackathon to do some kind of machine learning on something. I don't even remember anymore. Fake news, I think. Yeah. That was like my first ever machine learning project in the wild, so to speak, something that was like unrelated to coursework. And yeah, I think that was like one of the first things that I put on my CV like ever. And so Kaggle competitions, hackathons at Tech Fest, these are great places where you have a defined problem statement and you can apply your learnings from these courses, from your undergrad courses and so on to sort of build something, put it out there, clean up the code, put it on GitHub, put it on your CV, clean it up and put it on GitHub. That is important because in the future, when someone wants to take a bet on you, this is evidence that, you care, you can write good code, you put it out there. Course projects, a lot of the courses that like the example course that I was talking about in the previous slide, but there is also like, I'm sure like courses at IIT Kanpur, a lot of time they have course projects. I mean, I did a bunch of courses in my undergrad that had like a final year project where 2 or 3 people had to get together and do something. So those group projects, I think they are also really good to put on your CVs when you are sort of starting out. Again, clean up the code, put it on GitHub. Write up like, if there is like a write-up or a PDF that you've submitted, clean that up, write a technical report, put it on the GitHub or like put it on, I don't know, Google Drive and link it to your CV, like put it out there somewhere for someone to read. So the more sort of this kind of evidence that you can create to show the work that you have done, you are making it easier to take someone or for someone to take a chance on you. Contribute to research by PhD students or professors at your universities. I don't know if there are mechanisms to do this at IIT Kanpur, but at BITS we had what were called study-oriented projects. So we could basically take a 6-unit class and we would be graded for it. And like there's no lecture in that class. The whole point of that is like you do research with the professor. And so I think those kinds of things are also really good. I think especially working with professors is also useful because eventually, no matter where you go, you're going to need letters. And I mean, I don't want this to sound transactional, but I think it is important to know your professors. It is important to having worked with professors because eventually when you apply to like PhD programs, master's programs, you're going to need letters. And so working with professors is usually a good way to get those strong letters as well. I'm now listing some things that I know now. I wish I knew back then. So the first 4 were things I have done. The next few are things I have not done, but because I didn't know about them. So I'm putting it out there. There's something called as an ML reproducibility challenge. Now, the whole point of this, and I'll share the slide so you can go to the links later. But the point of this is like you take like a famous machine learning paper and you re-implement it to reproduce the results. And then you sort of write up a technical report about like whether you were able to reproduce the results. And they have like a yearly workshop, which is usually co-located with NeurIPS, I think, or something like that. Like it is co-located with one of the top conferences, and they will like publish these technical reports about machine learning papers reproduced. So I think this is really good because a lot of people do release their code. A lot of people don't, but a lot of papers out there, people do release their code. So this gives practice on both reading like current research papers, but then also you have help from their code. You can like run it again. It gives you more exposure. You can write up a technical report. You can publish it. You can, present it. And so it gives you both sort of experience, but also exposure because you are engaging with like a broader research community. Then there are what I have labeled as shared task at workshop. Now, let me tell you what this means. So a lot of these big conferences like AI conferences. So for NLP, my field, we usually have ACL, which is the conference by the Association of Computational Linguistics. Then there are all these big machine learning conferences, NeurIPS, iClear, ICML, etc. A lot of these conferences have what they call workshops. Now, workshops are these smaller venues of niche topics. And in ACL, especially, there is a long history of workshops hosting shared tasks. Now, what are shared tasks? Shared tasks are fancy Kaggle competitions. What that means is usually the organizers will release a problem statement. They will release some training data, some evaluation data. It depends on what the task is. And then your sort of job as a participating team is to solve that problem, like present a system to solve that problem. The difference between this maybe and the Kaggle competitions is like this is usually a little bit more like research or research centric in the sense that it's usually on topics that people in the research community care about. So let's say there is a workshop on multilingual. So the MRL workshop is multilingual representation learning. So their shared task is sort of focused on something related to multilingual representation learning. There's this other thing called SemEval, which is a short form for semantic evaluation, I think, and they have like a really long history of like shared tasks. So every year they release like 10 shared tasks, I think. And the other benefit of this is that usually if you participate in this, they will ask you to write up your report as an 8-page workshop paper, which is then published at the workshop. So I think this is also good in that sense, like it gives you platform. You publish this work, you put it out there. So not only is like the shared task or like you can like put out the GitHub and everything, but you also have like a workshop paper to show for it. I think increasingly things have gotten competitive in a way that people want to see publications on your CV even before you start a PhD. And I think this is one of the first step paths to publications in some sense. Like before you've started doing your own independent research, this is like one way you can have maybe a paper or two, get some experience, get some exposure to the community, get a chance to attend these conferences, meet more people, sort of disseminate your work and get exposure. There are community-driven collaborations. So there are some of these groups, for example, Cohere, Masakhana NLP, ML Commons. These usually run like collaborative Slack or Discord channels. And they have like people in like a broad range of research experience, from people who have no experience to like senior researchers. A lot of times it will be like Cohere, for example, is famous. They recently, or not recently at this point, maybe 2 years ago, but they did what they called like the AYA models, which were like multilingual, multicultural foundation models for a lot of different languages. And for that collaboration, they did it through their open community sort of. So a lot of people were involved in it. So you sort of just join these Slack channels, introduce yourself. More often than not, you will see like posts about, oh, we're trying to run this project. Is anyone interested in contributing? And like you can just, start contributing to whatever interests you. Masakhana NLP is a group that focuses on African languages, so multilingual NLP, but specifically focused for African languages. If I'm not wrong, I remember at some point someone told me that there is an India equivalent of this. There is a Slack channel, but I think I couldn't find the website, so I may have missed it. But there might be an India equivalent of this. And then ML Columns is a similar sort of collaborative group. So these are also again good in that sense, like you can become part of research collaborations that eventually sort of become publications. You're doing like more cutting edge research, but since it's like driven through a larger collaboration, you can still very much be in a learning phase and still contribute. And then for discovering more of these type of opportunities, obviously social media. Academia is unfortunately very weirdly built in this sense, like everything travels through this grapevine, and you just have to like be near the grapevine to sort of get the right information. And so follow researchers, PhD students, professors, etc. on all of these social media. And this is very important, which is to read. And so while you are doing all of the steps above, I think reading is underrated. It is becoming more and more underrated. By reading, I mean reading research papers. And I think it's hard at first because you don't understand what the hell is going on in one paper. But the more you read in one topic, the more you will start developing sort of this bird's eye view of what's going on in the field, what is missing, what are some gaps and whatnot. And I think that bird's eye view is what is very, very important when you start thinking about applying to PhD programs. Yeah, once you've done all this and you have like some kind of a profile, take a step back and think about why you want to pursue research. I think I've been increasingly talking to a lot of people now who are interested in AI, and that is great, but I don't think that you need to do research in order to build a career in AI. I think that increasingly there are a lot more roles out there at startups, at big tech, at medium-sized companies that involve building AI rather than researching AI, and that is fine, right? Like that is great. So if you're interested in just AI, that doesn't mean that you have to do research about AI, because those two are different things. So I guess like take a step back and think about whether you are just interested in AI or whether you're interested in like research, right? And if you're actually interested in research, I think that is when you can then start thinking about sort of bigger steps, research internships, pre-doctoral roles, and so on. Yeah, for bigger steps like internships, pre-doc roles, there are some structured programs. Microsoft Research regularly runs like internship applications. Adobe Labs in India has this. There are some of these like global programs. DAD is the German, I think, and MyTax is like from Canada. There are a bunch of these. Like, I think if you look these up, you will find like a lot of information online. So I've like not put it here. There are some structured pre-docs. So pre-docs, like I was saying, are these 1-2 year RA-ship, research assistantship type roles. MSR has what they call the research fellow program. Google India has what they call the pre-doctoral researcher program. And what I mean by structured here is like there is like a fixed sort of application cycle, and there's like a portal on which you apply, and there's like a process, there's interviews and so on, right? So these are like the structured ones. The unstructured ones are basically cold emailing. So a lot of times professors everywhere will be looking for students to support their research. Sometimes even PhD students, like sometimes senior PhD students are looking for like, contributors to support their research. And the way to get to that is usually cold mailing. So once once you start lurking on social media, you will see these posts about people trying to hire, people looking for someone to work with, blah, blah, blah. The only way to get there is to email and email a lot. The places that I've seen people go a lot are IITs, IIITs, ISC, etc. in India. Obviously, this is not an exhaustive list by far. Lot of universities in the that's an AI assistant. Never mind. A lot of universities in Middle East cropping up recently. So MBZ, MBZ, yes, that's the one. CMU has a Qatar campus. NYU has a Abu Dhabi campus. A lot of these places in the Middle East. KAIST in South Korea, NTU and US and Singapore. Lot of different places in Europe, like all over Europe. I think people try for US and Canada, but the way things are, and especially with like visa stuff for these countries, it is harder. And I think Europe and some of these other places are like a lot more friendly this way. Of course, I will share these slides, and this is not an exhaustive list. A quick note about cold mailing, because I think these are tips I wish I knew when I was cold mailing. Keep it short. I recently, for some reason, looked back at some of like the cold emails that I had sent in my undergrad for my first internships, and they were long. Like, as if I was on the receiving end of this, knowing what I know now, I would have been like, why am I reading this? So keep it short, keep it to the point. It should fit on sort of one mobile screen. So like maybe 2 paragraphs and like a short paragraph. That's it. This is happening a lot recently. I'm seeing a lot of professors post about this on social media, where they are getting a lot of what they suspect is like ChatGPT generated emails. The way that they can tell is like if person A throws in a bunch of papers into ChatGPT and asks to write an email, and person B also does the same thing, ChatGPT probably gives very similar responses. And so professors can tell because they've started receiving emails that sound eerily too similar. Like, how can 2 different people point out the exact same thing about the exact same set of papers and suggest the exact same follow-up in the email, right? Like, that's suspicious, but that is exactly what sort of LLMs do. So I'm not saying don't use LLMs in your writing. Like, I know that it can help polish sometimes, look for grammar, whatnot, etc. But be careful of how you use ChatGPT, how you use LLMs, and definitely don't do it like here's 3 papers from a professor, compose an email and then copy paste that answer to the professor. Like they can tell. Mention what you are interested in and how it aligns with their work. I think that this is something that I did not do. I talked a lot about their work, and professors are not interested in hearing about their work. They already know about their work. What they want to know is why you find it interesting and how it aligns with your interest, right? And so focus a little bit on you in the emails. Too broad is not great. I have seen these emails, I have received these emails, things that will say, I am interested in machine learning. It's too broad. Machine learning is too broad. It's an entire department. It's 3 departments at CMU. You need to be more specific. Robustness, agents, NLP, also too broad. Like you want to get to specific problems. Too narrow is also not that great. So the other pitfall is like you can be like, I really like this one paper of yours and I think that there can be a follow-up work to this paper. Well, maybe they're not interested in that paper anymore, right? And you're sort of cutting off your own chance. So too broad is not great. Too narrow is not great. A good balance is what is important. And what a good balance looks like is like, it looks like some specific problem that is, fundamental. So something like, okay, with agents, a lot of people are evaluating agents with like success at the end of the task, but agents take all of these intermediate steps in the between. How can we evaluate these intermediate steps of an agent? Now, this is like a problem that is not too narrow. It's not one research paper. But at the same time, it's not like I'm interested in agents, So something more specific. How do you find these problems? Old advice, read. That's how you find these problems. And I know that I had like a question about academia versus industry on the form or somewhere. So a quick note about that. If you do decide to go for industry internships and pre-doc, make sure you talk to whoever the mentor there, because freedom of research and freedom of publications is becoming it looks very different now than it did like a couple of years ago, and it is becoming more top down where you have limited freedom on what you can do. It is also becoming more stringent around what can be published. So I have had friends who have been in position where they've been in an industry lab and then eventually they've not been able to sort of publish their work. Now, while good experience is important and it's good, but if your ultimate goal is a PhD admit, a PhD application, then you do want to be able to publish. So yeah, like if you do go to industry, make sure you talk to whoever is sort of your manager, your advisor, and balance sort of these expectations of external exposure for your future goals. PhD, ask yourself, are you sure you want to do one? Like really ask yourself. PhD is often a bad decision for a lot of different reasons. It's a bad financial decision. It's a bad decision for your mental health. If you do it in a country outside the US, you sort of leave your family, your social life behind to move to this place where it snows 6 months and it's dark and gloomy. So please really think through whether or not you want to do this. Again, there are a lot of paths to doing AI work that don't involve research and that don't involve a PhD. So make sure you want to do it. And the way to figure that out is obviously whether you like it or not, based on all of the experience, but then also talking to a lot of people. Briefly go over what matters for PhD applications. I think this is the most important thing. Letters of recommendations are the most important signal in PhD applications. You want good and strong letters. Preferably, you also want letters from someone who has who is involved in the community, right? Like, for example, if you're applying for a PhD in machine learning, but your professor who is writing your letter is in the mechanical engineering department, that's not really going to be that helpful, right? But if there's a professor who works on machine learning, regularly goes to these conferences, like them, I don't want to use the word undergrad, but the independent research is the important part. Like you should have, it's not just, like a PhD, like a PhD student, a senior researcher told me to do something and I just wrote the code for it. No, they want to see that you have the ability to sort of identify what are important problems, work on those problems, design solutions to those problems on your own. How do they know that? They know that based on both your experience, but they also know that from the letters. Your interest and your fit with potential advisors matter a lot. So a lot of time, very good candidates are rejected simply because there is no one in that department doing that kind of work, or whoever is doing that kind of work is for one reason or the other not hiring that season, right? And so that happens. Network is somewhat important. So if you're on social media, you're engaging with people. If you publish, you go to these workshops, you engage with people. I think network is somewhat important. Like academia is a grapevine. People will take bets on people they know a lot more easily. Publications are somewhat important. The things above publications are, I would say, more important. So this is like in order of priority. By and large, I'm seeing that for PhD admissions, like at least one good paper is important, but even if you don't have a good paper, the above things are probably more important. SWE development experience, in my experience, now also having been on the other side, sort of having reviewed PhD applications, it is valued to some extent. Like if you have a very long like SWE experience, development experience, it shows that you have sort of maturity, engineering skills, which is important, especially for machine learning PhDs these days. But like it's not one of the top things up there, right? And then GPA, GRE score, other undergrad things, no one cares, really. No one cares. No one looks at your GPA. No one looks at your GRE score. It doesn't matter. People recommended this to me, and so I will pass it along. Although I know a lot of people who did not have more than 8 as a CGPA still get into PhD programs, good PhD programs. So I genuinely think it doesn't matter as much. But I guess it's on your profile and you never know when someone might look at it. So you might as well put some effort into it. But that's all I have. I have this GitHub that has like a bunch of, to the question, low GPA even at places like CMU. Yes, I have a friend who had like a 7 point something in undergrad and they're at CMU right now. So yeah, genuinely doesn't matter. This is different for masters though. For masters, GPAs matter a lot. A lot of top places almost have like cutoffs. So like if you don't have like above 8 or above 8.5, they don't even look at your applications. They don't say that, but they do that. So when I say GPA is not important, I mean completely and solely for PhD applications, not master's applications. So yeah, this is all I have, and I see questions in the chat, so I can start from there. What was my research? What was my reason of getting into ML research rather than application role for ML? What made you choose research over application-based jobs? So I think I did. So the original reason that I started doing some research was I wanted to do a master's, I thought. And then again, like for master's applications too, you need like letters of recommendations. To get good letters of recommendations, you have to work with professors. And typically, if you're working with professors, you're working on research. So that is kind of why I started, because I was like, oh, for masters, I need letters and I need to work with these professors. Eventually, I really liked it. So the MSR internship, I think that was a very defining sort of change for me, where I was like, I figured out that I enjoyed the process of research rather than the topic. So I was working on something completely different in my undergrad. I was working on something completely different in MSR, and I still enjoyed it. And so I think that was my clue that I enjoyed this process rather than the specific topic. And I think that is a big one. Like, I think if you are interested in research, you would usually enjoy the process rather than the building a solution part of it. So yeah, that is like one of the turning points for me. And then I think eventually I figured out that I probably want to be in academia. And so it's a rabbit hole from there. Okay, so the next question is, in the shortened version, I imagine this is talking about the email. How should I show my work and how I fit for this position when word limit is very less? Should I attach a SOP in the email? Blah, blah. Okay. I don't think anyone, especially a professor who you are cold emailing, is ever going to read through your SOP. They have way too much work. They're way too busy. They barely read their PhD students' emails as it is. They're not going to read that from a stranger. It doesn't matter. I think what matters is being able to communicate your work very, very crisply. Use hyperlinks a lot. So instead of describing your entire research over there, you can say something like, I have worked on evaluating agents' intermediate steps. Take this phrase and link it to the paper where you have done this research. I have worked on fairness in machine learning. Take the paper, link it there. So you can still fit all of your research in probably less than 3 lines. You should be able to do this. Like, if you've ever been to talks of PhD students or professors, they will often very briefly be able to describe what they work on. And I think that also is a skill that requires practice. So no, don't attach a 2-page SOP. No one is going to read it. Keep it crisp. Keep it to the point. Like, you may have done 5 different things, but only 2 of them might be relevant to this specific person that you are emailing. And that's fine. You don't have to mention the other 3 things. You can always link your CV. You can always either attach it, or you can, like, this is what I used to do, which is like I made a website and that would have sort of my interests more detailed, things that I have worked on and so on. And like, you can always put sort of a link to that. And like, if someone is captivated by your email, they will probably click through, go to your website, read more if they're interested. But no one's reading a 2-page SOP. I guess I already answered GPA at places like CMU. What do you mean by good papers? Does it mean A-star conferences? So yes and no. I think that having published at a top venue is a good signal. But I don't think all papers published at A-star conferences are good. Unfortunately, there are some really bad papers out there. I don't know if this news has reached you all, but like recently there has been a lot of discussion around the fact that like some hundreds of papers in Europe had like hallucinated citations and stuff like that because people are using ChatGPT. So yeah, I mean, if you can publish in top conferences, but I don't think that just publishing is not the necessary and sufficient condition here. By good papers, I usually mean like, first, these are problems that the community cares about. So it means you've put some thought into figuring out what you should work on and why. They are rigorous, right? So whatever experiment you have designed, you've done ablations, like that quality shows when an experienced person reads it. So rigor, and then also to some extent good writing. Right. So like the technical report itself, like it doesn't even have to be a published paper. It can just be like a technical report from your course project, but it is polished. So it it describes what you did very well, and it reads like a paper. So I think writing quality. So that is what I mean by good papers. If they are published, that is great. I would recommend trying hard to get at least one, maybe even two papers published. They don't have to be top conferences. They can be workshop papers. Obviously, like, the more you can get, always the better, but still. How do you tell if this is the topic you want to do research in at the start, aligned with your interest or not? What is the strategic ways to figure out so that you don't waste time changing subjects? I think this is a very good question. Unfortunately, I don't think it has a very good answer. I think in my second year, I spent some time sort of dabbling around in like different areas. And then I did like this one machine learning thing, and it was a rabbit hole from there, because I think that this happens where you do one NLP project. So the next time someone, like, you go to a professor and you're like, oh, I want to do some research, they're going to ask you, what have you done before? And if you've done an ML project, you will be given another ML project, and you're kind of in that rabbit hole. I think stepping out of it is like a very conscious decision. This is where I will say this is why research and AI is not synonymous, because research skills can be applied to a lot of different topics, right? You don't have to do research in exactly one thing. Like, the skill set of a researcher is more or less similar irrespective of what you're doing topic wise. And there is no good answer to this other than just like try a bunch of things early and fail fast. So don't invest too much unless you know that this is where you're going. But try a bunch of things like Kaggle competitions. They're low stakes. You can try a bunch of different Kaggle competitions and try a bunch of different courses and see what works. How would you describe the process of research? Can you give an example? So I think the research process usually involves reading a lot. So the first thing is you have to figure out what you want to work on. Now, some of this can be advisor guided. So like if I'm at an internship or I was in a pre-doc role, they already had like some, broad umbrella of interest. And usually you will work with an advisor, and like that advisor has their own research interest and their own research expertise, right? So it is somewhat guided by that. But then you want to figure out exactly what you want to do. And the first step is usually reading. So getting a sense of where the field is at, what the knowledge gaps are, what the gaps are, so to speak. I think the next thing is, once you know that this is a knowledge gap, is like sort of designing experiments. And I say experiments as like they don't have to be like quantitative experiments or revelation studies. Like depending on the topic, they can be like, okay, maybe you need to collect a data set. Maybe you need to build a new metric. Maybe you need to develop a new algorithm. Maybe you need to go and do a user study. Maybe you need to interview people for that particular problem, right? And so I use the word experiment loosely, but basically it is the design of the things that you will do to answer these sort of specific questions. So once you've identified the knowledge gap, once you've identified the research problem, research questions, from there it's sort of like this design of, what you should do to solve this problem. Then you actually have to do it, which is sometimes more annoying than the design part of it. The design part of it is more fun. And then you have to actually do it. Most of the time, once you're done, you have to write it up, submit, etc., etc. So yeah, that's what a usual research project looks like. And I would say that this high-level process looks more or less the same, irrespective of what field you work in. And I don't mean just computer science either. I mean like just broadly speaking. So yeah, that is an example of research. Do you think the earning well is something that we should not expect, at least till we complete a PhD? Thanks a ton. I'm not sure I understand this question. Is whoever asked this question around, if they can just unmute and clarify?
Yes, ma'am. Hi. Thanks for the session, first of all. I asked this question. So I just want to know that. So I am at kind of, I'm trying to decide what I should do, and there are all of these, software companies and quant companies that come in with their big offers. But then, obviously, if I do go into research, that is probably not, I think, something I can expect. So I was just wondering how much truth there is to that, and after I complete my PhD, what sort of earning opportunities lie?
Okay, so I can tell you what stipends look like in the US. So in the US, a PhD stipend is anywhere between like 3 to 4,000, depending on the university you are in, depending on the city you are in. Also, usually this stipend is more than enough to cover your basic expenses. So you're not paying out of pocket. You are maybe even saving some amount of money, but at an equivalent place, like someone who graduated at the same time at me, did a master's, is earning like upwards of 10 to 12K. So I'm making like a quarter of money that I could have been making. This is why I was talking about in the beginning also, make sure you want to do a PhD to do a PhD, because frankly, it's a bad decision for your financial health. You could be making a lot more money if you went to one of these, if you did do like a regular industry role. In general, most people who want to do a PhD are not really doing it for the money, as insane as that sounds. And so a lot of time it's not really in your control how much you can earn, because I think even in India, from what I know at IITs and stuff, the stipends are more or less fixed, right? Like there's not a lot of negotiating power over there. So you kind of have to live with it. In terms of opportunities after a PhD, I think that this varies a lot depending on where you are. In the US, I've heard anywhere like salaries starting from like 150 to 300 to 400,000. If you get big, I don't know, if you go work for OpenAI, they probably pay you $1 million. I have no idea. But most of the people who want to do a PhD are probably not in it for the money. Or like, I don't even mean that as like a value judgment. Like, I don't want to say they're better because they're not in it for the money or anything like that. But it's just like, you don't have a choice. That's how PhDs work. They will give you that much money. If you're okay taking it, it's fine. And I think that it's okay if I think it's good even maybe to like, right after undergrad, maybe spend a few years working, gather that capital, gather that maturity, gather that experience, then make a decision about a PhD. I thought that the 2 years that I spent working between my undergrad and PhD were very, very, very important for my PhD to be successful. Not because it was like, oh, I learned to do research or like I'm ahead of everyone else or anything like that. Nope. But it's more like you got both, like you started living as a earning adult, which you don't do in undergrad, and that life is a little bit different. And that helps a little bit in maintaining your sanity when you are in a PhD program. So yeah, that's my sort of not very good answer to a very difficult questions. I think I can stay for like 10-15 more minutes because I see there are a bunch of more questions. So if that's okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah. So the next one is funding is significantly decreased. Can you share about the landscape? Yes, this is all I can say, that this is true. Funding in the US right now is very uncertain, especially if you are working on like some topics more than other. It's a lot more uncertain. A lot less PhD offers are going out. Universities are being conservative in hiring professors, in hiring PhD students. There is impact, like there is no denying that. I think that itself has created like some amount of like more scarcity than it already existed. I think it has percolated to industry as well. Like the job markets are bad. Even after a PhD, getting an academic job is harder and whatnot. So all I will say, the answer to this question is like, yes, unfortunately, things are bad right now. There is less money than there usually is, and we can only hope that a few years from now, 2 years, 3 years from now, it ceases to be the case. But I think up until then, no one really knows, and I guess you just have to sort of try your luck. Do PhDs at CMU go to places like OpenAI or HFTs like Citadel and Change? I think it depends on what you work on, right? Like I think if you work on language models, you could probably go to OpenAI. But if you're like a more like, I have no idea who HFTs want to hire, but I can only imagine that it is people who do like math and statistics. So yeah, like CMU is a big school. Most of these big CS schools are big schools, and I think where you will end up probably depends a lot more on your interest and your research than anything else. So yeah, I'm okay. Hopefully you can land up wherever you want. What credentials are required and what are the standouts among them for getting a pre-doc at DeepMind as an undergraduate? Okay, so I didn't talk a lot about like the pre-doc process, and there's a blog that I wrote when I joined Google about the process that I can link here, and I can also put it on the slides. I think in general, it was very much like research fit and some research experience. So this is what I mean when I say that MSR was my break and not Google, because I had MSR on my CV when I was applying to Google, and I think that was useful. So I think that having done some research already before, I think that is useful. So this is like maybe even one step more than all of like the basic steps I listed. So once you have done the basic steps, one step further is you have like either interned or like done a research assistantship with someone either at your university or elsewhere. And I think like that is maybe like one big CV item that can be like a sort of standout, so to speak. I also think, and this is very important to remember for research, fit is the most important thing. So a lot of time you can be a very good candidate, you have a lot of experience, but let's say all of your experience is in fairness for machine learning, and their projects, or they want to hire someone to do work on agents. They're not going to hire you, and that is not a statement about your potential. That is not a statement about your skills and whether or not you are a good candidate. It's just a mismatch of interests, and it is not your fault. This happens a lot in PhD admits. This happens in pre-doc programs. So like most of these people like MSR, Google, they already know the broad area of project that they want to hire in. And because there is so much competition out there, they will usually try to find someone who has like some experience or has dabbled in like this, like an area closer to this area. So if you are farther away from whatever that they are hiring for, there's nothing you could have done different, and that's fine. So I think that's a big one that people don't realize, which is like Google hires like 10 people a year. Like the pre-doc cohort is like maybe 10 or 12 people a year. They have like 3 or 4 teams. I think it's different now, their number of teams and all that. But they hire for specific things, and they have like thousands of applicants, and I'm pretty sure like hundreds of them are really good applicants, right? Like hundreds of them are applicants who could go to top PhD programs. But sometimes it's just a matter of like a question of fit, which like you can't really control. You cannot go out and do work in every area that is out there. That won't be helpful. And so a lot of times it's just about the fit. Okay, no more questions on the chat. I think I can see on the form.
Actually, I'm Vedant. I want to ask a question.
Okay.
Following up
following up my question on funding. So, is it a good idea to do a PhD in India itself, like places like ISC?
That's
I want to ask that what am I missing out specifically?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I don't think there is a one size fits all answer to this question. I firmly believe that when you are applying to these programs, you should apply broadly. You should apply very, very broadly. I myself applied to IISc as well. And then you should start thinking about pros and cons once you have the offers. So don't not apply to Indian PhDs. There's nothing inherently wrong in doing a PhD to India. I guess some of the pros are probably you are closer to family and stuff like that. I think that right now the scene in India is like really good. Like the government is investing a lot in AI research. A lot of places have really good professors. And so in that sense, like the scene is really coming up over here, which is a good thing. So I think you should keep a lookout. Things that you might miss out is like, one is a little bit maybe prestige, right? And so like, I don't know, like CMU is a big name, whatever. Stanford is a big name, whatever. And so like this IIT is maybe not equivalently a big name. But then if you do want to stay in India, it doesn't matter that much. But like, let's say you want to come out, that might make a little bit of a difference. I think to a little bit like the choice of pool is, or like the pool of choice is smaller. Maybe there are a handful places where a lot of cutting edge research is happening. There's like a handful professors. And so your choices are maybe a little bit more limited as compared to that. Like there are a lot more school, lot more professors doing, working on like a specific topic. So if you think about agents, for example, maybe like 5 people in India are working on it, but like in US there are 500 people working on it at this point. Everyone is working on it. Doesn't matter. But my point is like your choice of places and people may be limited. I think if this is an option that you're considering, I would highly recommend talking to PhD students in India. There are some really good people at ISC. There are some really good people at IIT Madras. I'm sure there are some really good people at IIT Kanpur. And talking to them, when I was considering this, one of the things I was told is also like I think there are some scholarships, government scholarships and stuff that allow you to go abroad and like visit professors abroad for a year or so during your PhD and so on. So like, I don't think that the opportunities are absent. Like, I think that they are there. You have to sort of look for them and you have to like talk to people in those positions in order to get that. Does that answer your question?
To some extent.
Yeah, but yeah, I don't think there is necessarily a like black and white answer to whether or not you should do a PhD in India. I think that there is not even a black and white answer to whether or not you should do a PhD in CMU. I think it does boil down to having the choices that you have in hand, then deciding based on like funding, location, professor, opportunities, all sorts of things. So yeah.
Thanks.
What are other research opportunities other than master's, PhD, or pre-doc programs? I guess research assistantships, like unstructured research assistantship. A lot of startups are coming up that are hiring a lot of people to do AI related work. I am told that a lot of like big tech SWE jobs have become very much AI related in recent years. So yeah, like I think startups and industries is just there. Like it's like any other like CSV, right? Like it's not that much different. From the form, how much CGPA apart is good enough to get there is no CGPA screening for PhD application. No one cares about your CGPA. I recommend 8 and above, but no one cares. There's a question about what to do during 2 years of a master's if you're already out of undergrad. So if you're in a master's program at somewhere right now and then you're thinking of PhD, I would hope that you should get to sort of this stage very quickly, and you should already be doing this. So like if you're in a master's program, go work with professors. That's it. That's the only answer I have. Go work with professors and go out there and start publishing. That's the simplest way to do it. Yeah, it's still the same steps. It's just that your timeline is a lot more compressed. Low CGPA, it doesn't matter. How hard is it to get into you? It's competitive. I think that you should be working towards a profile. How to build a profile for a theory CS PhD? I have no idea. You need to ask someone who is doing a theory CS PhD. I have absolutely no idea. I'm reading questions from the form. So there's a question about how to build a profile for a theory CS PhD. I have no idea. Maybe the career cell can invite someone who is doing their PhD in theory to talk about how to do that. Yeah, how a second or third year UG can prepare for research internships. I think irrespective of major. So I think that's the other thing. Even for PhD programs, no one cares about your major. There are people currently in my PhD program who are not CS majors. No one cares. What matters is you have experience, you have research. So most of the steps that I was talking about here earlier, it applies irrespective of whether you are a CS major or not. Maybe if you're not a CS major, there's probably like 1 or 2 extra management. I don't know. If you find an answer, tell me, because I'm struggling too. Yeah, I don't know. The only thing that has helped is like keeping to-dos. I put my to-dos on my calendar, so I will like block 2 hours and say, I will finish this work in this time. And that has been helping recently. But other than that, I honestly don't have a good answer. And if someone finds a good answer for this, tell me also. I guess that is all of the questions, unless someone has more questions. I see a new one. How is life in the US compared to India for you? That's a long conversation. That's a whole 1 hour separate session. Some other time. It's different is all I will say for now.
Yeah, I want to ask one question.
Yes, please go ahead.
Nowadays, because AI is readily available for us, so we are expected to produce results much faster and maybe expected with using AI. So you talked about building foundations, and when we are expected to produce results fast, then how can we build foundations?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think this is like a debate almost in the current moment. If I'm not wrong, Anthropic or someone released a paper recently that talked about the fact that AI use reduces like foundational skill building and so on and whatnot. But I think this is where being in an undergrad or like being in college in general, including a PhD, is the place to slow down and build foundations. Because like if you're in a job, if you're in a SWE job, like obviously your success depends on how fast you can get things done. And a lot of friends these days tell me like their managers want them to sort of use Claude, do things faster and whatnot, right? But like, I would be surprised if people are asking that of you in undergrad, like courses, curriculum go at the same pace, right? Like you have 4 years in a university. If you're in a master's, you have 2 years in a university. And like no one's sitting on your head asking you to go faster, and like the stakes are not related to speed as much. Obviously, I'm not saying it is like you're shielded from it, because like if everyone around you is moving faster and publishing at a faster pace, then you may feel the need to sort of keep up. And I think that is a pressure that we as PhD students face. And I don't think that there is a good answer to that, other than in the end, no matter where you will go, whether it is to get like a PhD admission or, even after a PhD, quantity matters to some extent, but in the end, quality is going to matter. And so, yeah, like I think the only way to do that is to like intentionally slow down, not be bogged down by all of the external pressure, which I know, by the way, I recommended being on social media, but social media doesn't help this. And so I myself have been a lot less on social media these days. But when I was starting out, I was on social media a lot more. And I think I recommend it as like this entry point into the grapevine. But like in general, it is a hard thing to do to not get bogged down by that pressure. But you gotta try. You gotta try. We gotta try. I gotta try. All of us. We're all in the same boat. But, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much for this extended session. Okay, one more question we had.
Oh,
Is there any way to contact you? Getting your
yeah, you can reach. I'm putting my email. You can send me an email.
Okay,
put my
any
email.
other questions? For Shelly, do we have any other questions? No. Okay, now we can officially wrap up the session. Thank you so much for your time. I'm grateful that you took some time from your busy schedule and shared your experiences and insights and the journey you had already gone through. And I must say with utmost honesty. And I'm sure that students have got a detailed idea about which will be helping them to pave their own path for the research journey. And thank you so much again for joining us. And
Yeah.
let's hope for some future collaborations as well.
Yeah, pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much for like staying up so late to attend the session.
Thank you so much for replying my long email.
No, that's fine. The code that did not apply.
Yeah.
Okay.
Still, he will be vigilant enough for the next time when he will be contacting some other speaker.
It's just easier, right? Like the easier you make it for
Yeah.
someone to respond, the easier it gets.
Yeah. Next
Okay.
time I will follow your guidelines.
Again, these are subjective, very heavily disclaimed by my experience. So people can, this is not wrong and right. Like, this is subjective. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. Thank you everyone for attending.
Yeah, we are grateful to have you here. Thank you so much for your
Thank
time
you.
again. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye. Bye bye. Bye bye.